This podcast is produced by the team behind the Answered the Call, Australian History, How to Research, World War I, Australian Imperial Force Soldiers, 1914 to 1918 online course. If you're not sure where to start or find navigating websites confusing, this easy-to-use and practical online course will show you how to confidently research military sources, records, and more. Check out the course webinar at the hyperlink answeredthecall.mykajabi.com for the details of how you can reveal your family's fascinating military history. G'day! Welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Blum. Today's special guest is Peter Hart, and he was the oral historian at London's Imperial War Museum, and he will be talking to us today about the Gallipoli Campaign from the British perspective. Hi, Pete. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Absolute delight, Adam. It's great that this podcast series has been got up, and I've been listening to some of them. They're absolutely brilliant. You've got some great guests on there. I feel privileged to be part of it.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you very much. So we're talking today about the British perspective for Gallipoli. And so what was the British objectives for the landing at Gallipoli?
Well, the first and main objective, Adam, is that certain British politicians, of which the key one, or the most influential one, because it's not fair to blame him entirely, is the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. And they were horrified by the scale of the casualties on the Western Front. They just found them, they couldn't see a way through, and they looked for an easier way. Now, they thought of some absolutely mad schemes, which you don't need to go to, attacking through the northern Germany, also, a seaborne landing here, there, and every bloody where. But they landed on. They were given the excuse by the Russians to ask for a bit of help because they were having some trouble with the Turks on their border, and this had been sorted out by General Winter, if you know what I mean. The actual Winter had killed most of the Turks, and they didn't really need any help, but it was sort of seized on as an excuse. And the idea was that they would the Dardanelles, because remember, it's a naval campaign first of all, as far as the British are concerned, the Royal Navy and the French Navy, and their first idea was to knock Turkey out of the war. To remove one of the Allies propping up Germany. It was to influence the wavering Balkan states to join in the Allies, influence Italy into joining the Allies, release this pressure on Russia, and open a sea route to the South Russian ports. That's through the Black Sea, which would allow sort of munitions to feed the Russian guns on the Eastern Front, that kind of thing. And also, in return, to allow the import of grain from Russia, all via this new sea route, if they could take the Straits. But the trouble with all this, Adam, is it's all bloody nonsense. I occasionally swear. You'll have to put up with that, I'm afraid.
That's all right, mate.
I know Australians don't like swearing. Don't I? Fuck. A bit of an editing problem there. And anyway, the thing is that it's all of this is bloody nonsense. Germany isn't being propped up by Turkey. If anything, it's the other way around. There is no back door to Germany. There's no easy route. Whether you go through Italy, you go through here, there is no easy route. You're going to have to beat the main army on the main front. It's just madness to think this is the best way of fighting Germany, is to get a new enemy. Secondly, it did bring Italy into the war, so I'm going to give them that one. The Balkan states, though, they never agree on anything. They fought the Balkan Wars against Turkey, and then they'd won, and then promptly fell out with each other, started scrapping with each other, and Turkey had, in essence, just taken back all they'd lost. To be the friend of one Balkan country is to be the enemy of the others. Has that changed? I don't think so. You look at the Balkans today, it's all the same. Feeding the Russian guns, well, 1915 is the year of the shell crisis. We didn't have enough shells to feed our own guns on the Western Front. That is the most irritating and stupid of all of the reasons, I think. And then slightly more complex ones, the the idea of the Russians sending food to us, well, actually, there's problems there. What about the U-boats? Where are these spare merchantmen to transport the stuff? And actually, how are the Russians going to get it to the ports? Because one of the big problems the Russians have is moving their food about their country. It's an incredible problem for them. The railways are stuffed with troops, moving troops about. It's the thing is, Germany has to be defeated on the main fronts. Now, true, the Russians are fighting on the East Front, but we know now that, even then, they had to be beaten on the Western Front, where the British and the French could fight side by side with a minimum of logistical problems. Britain had to fight the war as it was, not how visionaries like Bloody Churchill, that's his name in England, Bloody Churchill, might dream it to be. You've got to think where they are. The Germans are encamped in France. They're not on the border, they're in France. They control the main industrial region. People forget that where they were is the main industrial region. Round Luce and all around that area, all the coal mines, everything else, the steel mines, everything. Steel mines. Yeah, so just dig some steel up today. They're not far from the French capital. And if France is defeated, no one would ever ally with us again. We'd have had to send the whole BEF to make Gallipoli a success. It's all blasted nonsense. By attacking the Turks, we just allow them the opportunity to kill and maim British soldiers. And those British soldiers include your Australian countrymen and New Zealanders and the ones that are always forgotten, the French. The French fall in with this because they're suckered in. Everybody is told it's just going to be a naval assault. Oh, yeah, we might have to send a division just to occupy this and that, but it's going to be a naval attack. From start to finish, it's driven by wish fulfillment. And everything is wrong with it as a military operation of war. Look at Clausewitz, look at any of the great military leaders. It's all bollocks. Surprise. That's important in warfare, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Well, we'll have a bombardment before war's even properly declared by Britain anyway. Don't concentrate on the main enemy. Force generation. But the forces we generated weren't good enough. 29th Division, yeah, but it wasn't a division. It was just a collection of battalions scraped up from around the globe. The French, they were pretty good and they had proper artillery. Royal Naval Division, not really a division, no artillery, half trained. 42nd Division, Territorial Division, not properly trained. Australian and the Anzac Corps, not properly trained, not ready for war. I'm not saying these men aren't brave. I'm not saying these forces haven't got great potential. I'm just saying that in 1915, they're not ready for war. Wow. What's wrong with the British plans? Everything. And Churchill gets the blame because he was the persuasive one. He persuaded the British cabinet, who therefore collectively bear the blame. All of them. It's not just Churchill. And he also, and the British government and Churchill, persuaded the French, who also bear a responsibility. So there you go. What are our objectives? Knock the Turkey out of the war. Why? I don't know. It's just madness. I know that's a long-winded answer, and I am a long-winded bastard. Well, you know what the British are like.
No, it's a good answer, Pete. So plenty has been said about the planning for the campaign. In your opinion, did the British really know what the terrain was like, or was this one of the key mistakes that the British made, that they underestimated the terrain?
Well, a lot of work here. Let's give credit to Peter Chassot and Peter Doyle, who have done an awful lot of excellent work on this. And what they've shown is that we've been planning this sort of thing. The British have contingency plans for a lot of things. We've been planning, and in 1906, we'd come to the opinion people were touching with a barge pole, because you needed a huge military force. But the problem about the terrain is that we go on and on about the maps weren't adequate. Well, there's a brilliant British officer, whose name, of course, I've forgotten, but he was the captain of the Vengeance, I think. And he said, I've had a look at the maps, and, the map's perfectly clear as to what's there. He said, the trouble is that British army officers can't read a bloody map. And if you look at the maps, so Gully Ravine is a bit more steep than you might think. This is Gully Ravine at Helles. To use Anzac as an example, the link between Pluggies and Russell's Top isn't quite, it's the razor. All right, does that make any difference to the campaign? Do you know what? No, it doesn't. And we go on and on about the maps not being accurate, about not having sufficient intelligence. There was lots of intelligence. There were maps that we had. The maps we had of France were not accurate. We had to resurvey the whole of France, the battle zone, before we could shoot off the map artillery predicted fire. At Gallipoli, we have the 1850s French map, which we redrew. We didn't have any other maps. Now, people say, well, we had inadequate maps. What? Well, of course we had inadequate maps. We had the maps we had. Do you think the Turks are going to allow us to survey it? Excuse me, we're just coming ashore to survey it because we plan to invade you shortly. I hope you don't mind. Yeah, well, you see what I mean? It's a circular argument. We had crap maps. Why did we have crap maps? Because we had crap maps. But the maps were good enough. And if you look at the maps, and they're not a secret, the maps are in books. Peter Chassot's and Peter Doyle's book have the maps. You can see, and the main features are clearly laid out. The problems are not that we didn't understand the terrain. It's that we didn't understand the men holding the terrain.
It does. It makes sense. It really does. And you often hear, Pete, numerous times, oh, well, exactly what you said. The maps, it was a campaign that was rushed, and it was they were ill prepared, and they didn't know their enemy, and you hear that all the time.
You do, and there's some truth there. I'm not saying, they were ill prepared. I mean, Hamilton, who is the British commander-in-chief, didn't have proper maps. But a lot of people forget the reason it's rushed is because the naval campaign failed. And the 18th of March, for a lot of historians now, is the key date. Turks have pretty well always regarded it as the key date. That's the date that the Anglo-French fleet was defeated. The two of the greatest navies in the world were defeated. It was a tremendous defeat. It was unbelievable. It was caused by a combination of hubris, competent Turkish defending, and a very well-placed minefield. But they'd have run into more minefields further up. But it's key to remember, one of the reasons we were so ill-prepared was that we weren't expecting the Navy to fail. So this is what causes the rush. But in actual fact, it's all mission creep. It's all, we're going to do this. Oh, well, let's do that. And it's all things layered on top of each other that take you further and further away from what is sensible.
No, absolutely. So, in your opinion, Pete, looking at it from a British perspective, do you feel that the British underestimated the Turkish capabilities and their fierce determination to defend their homeland and their home country?
This is at the root of it all, and it's British hubris. And the British, to this day, every time there's a football World Cup, we think we're going to win it. We haven't changed much. Every time there's a Test match series, we think we're going to win it. We think we've got the best postman in the world, the best telephone system. We've got the best army. We've got the best, things were like that then. Hubris, British arrogance. That's why we're unpopular around the globe. Sometimes it's merited, but most times it isn't. Now, this time, what we're doing is we're seeing the Turks as inferiors. It's the thinking of the time. It's not particularly racism. It's just the thinking of the time. It is racist, but it's the thinking. They are inferior. We regard their training, their toughness. The evidence that they were tough is all around us. The fact that they'd marched across just before, in I think February or March, I can't remember now, of 1915, they'd marched across the Sinai Desert, dragging with them a pontoon. They managed to get across the Suez Canal, and then they fought basically to the death, the ones that got across. There's a couple of clues here that they're tough infantry. But our opinion was that once we were ashore, that resistance would collapse. Now, they expected trouble getting ashore, but they hadn't thought it through. They thought the Turks would collapse. They thought one British Tommy was worth 4 Turks. This we always think that. It's not true. In defense, in attack, the Turks, we'll discuss perhaps later, are not so good because of poor tactics, not because they're cowardly, because they're poor tactics. They're too brave, if you ask. But in defense, they are tough, brilliantly handled troops because leadership is also important, and the Turks were very well led. So yes, total underestimation of the potential of the Turks, and this at root of this, you've got to blame Hamilton for this, Sir Ian Hamilton, the British commander, because he does bear his plans are all predicated on the idea that get ashore and it'll be okay.
From all the research you hear, as we've said, Pete, in the past, it was take the heights in 3 days, and the 4th day it rains beer. Like that was
Matt. Yeah, Matt McLachlan, a mutual friend. That's his one. Yeah,
that's right. So after the naval attempt failed to take the Dardanelles, should the whole campaign have been abandoned, or do you agree that a land battle was the right course of action?
Well, it certainly wasn't the right course of action because we couldn't generate the force capable of doing it. You needed hundreds of thousands of men. You really need to land both sides of the straits. You need to land in Asia as well. You need a huge number of men. There were plans for using the Greek army, but they were still neutral plans for using this, that, and the other. I always thought it was impossible. I still think it's impossible. They should have abandoned it. The problem is prestige. See, you're handing the Turks a massive victory. Now, does this matter? Well, we're always getting defeated, the British. We'll come back again, again and again and again, but we're always suffering defeats. Why does this matter so much? Because they're Muslim. Now, this is not because of some hatred of Muslim. It's because half the bloody British Empire is Muslim. And if you show the Indians, for instance, that the British can be beaten, it's a bit of a propaganda disaster. And a lot of Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State of War, was particularly focused on this. He'd spent his life in India. He'd spent his life in Egypt, another British colony that was Muslim. So they were very worried, and they felt they had no option. That it's like when the Germans sink our small fleet at Coronel. You know what's going to happen. They're going to get it, and it's like this. There's this attitude, right? You've defeated them, right? We've got to show you we are going to land. So, in a sense, I understand from the perspective of the time that the British were not, and the French were not going to allow this defeat to stand. And in doing so, of course, with hindsight, we now know they just handed an even bigger victory to the Turks, an even more humiliating defeat, and the climb down at the evacuation.
Oh, absolutely. So, what was the British plan for the British landing at Cape Helles, Pete, and was it successful or not?
It was totally unsuccessful. It was as unsuccessful as the British plan for the Anzac landing. What happens with the landing is, and it's worth that, the Anzac landing is a British landing. I'm not being funny about this. The Anzacs are part of the British Army. And it's crucial for people to understand how things were. Hamilton is the commander. Hamilton's plans are ridiculously complex. And they, for various reasons, he felt they didn't have enough small boats to land. He diffused his strength. His idea was to land almost everywhere. So just to start with the diversions, he has a diversion at Bazika Bay. He has a diversion at the Blair Isthmus. He has the main landings at Helles are at V and W Beach, but he has landings to the side of it at X Beach and S Beach, and then he has another stupid landing halfway up Helles, the coast of Helles, at Y Beach. But that's not all. Across the straits to protect their flank, he has the French landing at Kamkali. He has the Anzacs landing at Anzac, well, it became called Anzac, 15 miles up the coast. All of these landings, and the fact is that they're all so far apart that they can't support each other. Even V and W, which are only very short distance apart. I mean, how far apart are they? they're not even a mile, are they? 3/4 of a mile, perhaps at most. They're still too far apart to support each other properly. And they all fight on their own. Now, because the Turks were actually operating a tripwire defence, basically hold you up at the coast as much as possible, find out where you're landing, find out where the main landings are, and then concentrate and throw you into the sea, preferably at night, because they were frightened of the naval guns. The thing is that everyone goes, oh, Hamilton's plans are really clever. They're not really clever. Well, probably really clever, but they aren't practical. They're not. They're too far apart. With hindsight, but actually with the plans that were considered in 1906, most people would say land. Do you know where the Cum Hotel is? Just to the south of Anzac. Land your troops between the Cum Hotel, which wasn't there, obviously, and Suvla Bay. Land all your forces there. Send in your covering brigade to seize the heights, then smash across to Khalid Bahir. Would that have succeeded? I don't think so. But it would have stood a chance. You'd have concentrated your forces. But spreading them out is just madness. So you've got the French landing at Kumkali. They're actually the most successful landings. We don't talk about them, but they are the most successful landing in many ways. And they're also the ones at most risk. And eventually they get pulled off because the British have made such a complete screw-up of Helles. I mean, if you think Anzac's a screw-up, although Anzac, there's one company hold back a division, but at Helles, one battalion holds back a division. It's just not good. I mean, the Anzac company is swiftly reinforced by 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. It's a complex business. Oh dear, what the plans? Any tactical possibilities are dissipated because there's not sufficient force landing anywhere. But then look at the problems. It's the first landing against modern weapons. The Turkish defenders perform brilliantly. The Turkish leadership perform brilliantly. At Helles, it's the local leaders. You don't even know their names, and I've forgotten them just at the moment. At Anzac, it's easier because they're Sefik Aka and Mustafa Kemal. They're unforgettable. And other Turkish leaders there. So Turkish leadership, brilliant. Turkish troops perform brilliantly. The plans are not appropriate. They are no good. Sorry, went on a bit there.
No, Pete, it's great. And so people are familiar with the Gallipoli landings and the story behind the landings. But in your opinion, have parts of it been confused with what happened at the landing at Helles or to the British troops? And did they? You often hear at Anzac that the men landed under fierce fire and they experienced heavy losses. Have they got that confused with the landings at Helles?
I think there's some confusion. I mean, part of the trouble at Anzac is that it's a pretty well an unopposed landing. And this is not a British denigrating Australia, because it may have been pretty well unopposed near the beach. When they got into the hills, they ran into incredible opposition, led by Sefik Aka and Mustafa Kemal. And they really suffer in those ridges. The casualties are terrible, the rest of it. There is a subset of endless argument about machine guns. I side with the people who have analysed the Turkish things. There are no Turkish machine guns. They turn up after about 10 o'clock on Gun Ridge, on Third Ridge. But it's just, there is no evidence they would have captured them. And it's the same at Helles. Now, at Helles, two of the beaches are quite stiff. They're landing in what Peter Doyle calls a natural amphitheatre. All beaches are natural amphitheatres in one sense, but he's right that they're landing. It's like they're on the stage and everybody's shooting at them from the stall. So it's a great analogy by Peter. And so people say there were machine guns. Well, I don't think there were. But what I would say is there's about a company of Turkish infantry at both W and V beaches, and they're backed up at V beach by Nordenfelds, which are sort of mechanical machine guns that chew up boats. And what I want to say is that the fire is intense. You've got people, all right, they can't fire 15 rounds a minute, but 10 rounds a minute from, say, 200 people firing down onto a beach is enough to to really smash you to bits. And there are severe casualties at W and at V Beach. If you look at the pictures of the Anzac Cove Beach, there aren't any casualties laid on it. If you look at the pictures of W Beach after the landing, you can see there's corpses all up the beach. When there's a picture of the Essex landing, and those lumps and bumps aren't seaweed. Then there's a picture of from the River Clyde, and you can see the corpses all along the beach and things. So there was much worse opposition at V and W Beach. Funnily enough, it was easier when they got inland, but still opposition. That Turkish battalion, it's the 3rd battalion of their 26th regiment, and just like people remember the 57th regiment at Anzac, so these people should be better remembered. There's basically 1,000 men facing 12,000 British troops. So you can imagine how brilliantly they fought. They had no machine guns, very little artillery support, very few feasible landmines, but what they had got, good leadership, well-trained troops, and they had most of all their rifles, and they knew how to use them. Looking at the other beaches, X Beach had 12 people facing them, and Y Beach had none. S Beach had a platoon. And yet the landings all fail. S Beach, they land, they boot off the platoon, who then snipe them all day. They don't know what to do. They've been ordered to stay there. Should they go back to... There's more British troops ashore at S Beach than there are in the whole of Ellis. Should they go back and help at V Beach? What should they do? They decide to hold the high ground. Who can blame them? It's just hindsight to say anything else. They've been told to stay there. X Beach, well, they land, they move inland a bit, they get in touch with W Beach, they don't really do much at all. And there's a small counterattack, which is then made out to be thousands of Turks. Y Beach, they do nothing. They don't even prepare defences. They're there as a sort of in the side of the Turks, as they, any Turkish reinforcement, it's sort of a punch in their side as they move down the peninsula. Oh, great. Would they be able to cope with those Turkish reinforcements? Well, apparently not, because they're booted off next morning. The plan, and you notice they don't work together. X and W Beach manage to link up. The others don't link up. V doesn't link up with W. S doesn't link with V. Y doesn't link with X. They're all separate battles. If you read any book on Gallipoli, it's like there's 5 battles going on.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, Pete. And you've put it in perspective, really, essentially, it's like 6 separate battles going on, and they're all trying to achieve the one objective. Like, it's just madness.
It's just not good enough. And then you've got the Royal Naval Division fannying about at the Gulf of Saros, the Bull Air Isthmus, doing nothing, doing a diversion that diverts nothing. It does hold them up a bit. It's not an entire failure, but that's because von Sanders, the German commander of the Turks, was obsessed with Bull Air. It's nothing to do with our brilliance. It's just that he was obsessed with it. You could have sailed a rowing boat up there, and it'd stay there. Funnily enough, that's with the Freiburg. That's fundamentally what they end up doing. So I'll withdraw gracefully from that.
So, Pete, we can't take away from the men how hard they fought and how bravely they fought. So, how many
on both sides?
On both sides. How many Victoria Crosses were won during the landings?
Loads. You swine. My legendary well, there were 6 at W Beach. The story at W Beach it shows the weakness of the defence. They land, they're under terrible fire, never demean, or they land under terrible fire. They're trapped by the barbed wire. They're suffering terrible casualties. They're under fire, in my view, from concentrated rifle fire from both sides and the front, from the cliffs. But you can see how weak the defences are, because one brigadier, Stuart Hare, lands to the left of the beach and goes up the cliffs. I've walked up that cliff many times. People call it cliffs. It's not. It's a sort of mud paths and things. You can walk up reasonably easy, but with equipment less easily. He goes up the side with a few men and turns the defences. And that's an illustration, just a few men. That's how few Turks there were. Once he cracked them, they were off. They got 6 VCs there. I think 2 or 3 were awarded straight away. And then later by ballot, they get to it. And it's always called 6 VCs before breakfast. Were they brave men? Yes. Did they deserve the VC? At the time, it was seen as reasonable. Would they have got the VC for it later in the war? Definitely not. And there is just a touch in this Gallipoli business of Rorke's driftism. Don't look at Isandlwana. Look over here at Rorke's Drift. There's loads of VCs here. You know, don't look at this complete mishmash and failure of a campaign. Look at the heroism on V and W Beach. At V Beach, there they would have, the people would have got, because a lot of it's rescuing the wounded, doing amazing things, and a lot of those VCs are what we call real, and there's about 6 or 8 there as well. I can't remember. VCs aren't my thing.
Yep.
VCs are a lottery. Most of the people who get it are incredibly brave and well and truly merit it. Some of them are charlatans, very few, and some of them don't. You just think of all the chaps who deserved it and didn't get it. You've got to be seen by an officer. That means the officer has to live.
Very true. Yes. Very true. So, what were the physical conditions like at Helles, and how were they similar or different to what the men faced at Anzac and Suvla Bay?
You mean by physical? You mean the landscape?
Yes. Well, yes, the landscape.
Well, luckily we both have a map of Gallipoli about our person, a map of Helles. So what you have to do, Adam, and you at home, is put your right hand out in front of you. Okay, there's your right hand in front of you. Now, that is a map of Helles. And if you look, there's your little finger, right? That's called, your little finger is Gully Spur. Between Gully Spur and the next one, which is Fir Tree Spur, is Gully Ravine. Now, I'm afraid this is not to scale because Gully Ravine is the biggest, but of course your hand's not funny. So, but that is Gully Ravine, the gap between your little finger and your whatever finger that is. So there, between Fir Tree Spur and Krithia Spur is Krithia Nulla, okay? Between Krithia Spur and Kerev Spur, which is your forefinger, is actually Baba Nulla. That's just a bit of a, and then between Kerev Spur and the other, and your thumb, that is Kerev's Dare. Okay? Now, where you're, that is, so what you've got is you've got a landscape that's broken by these, by 1, 2, 3, 4 gullies. For the British, there's the 3 gullies, Gully Ravine, Krithia Nulla and Achibaba Nulla, and then you have the French sector, which is Kerev's Spur, and Kerev's Dare Valley. The Turks are on your knuckles. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
That's where the Turks are, and where your wrist comes off, the sort of wrist bone, that's Achibaba. So there you are, in front of you at home. You have a map. I'm sure we'll put a map up for people who don't want to use their right hand. It's what your right hand's for, I always say, Adam. So there's your map. So what we have is some of these, Gully Ravine is a serious ravine. Have you ever been up it? Australians don't tend to go up unless they're with me.
I haven't, Pete. No, I've been to Anzac and Helles, the actual landing, but I haven't been there myself. No.
Well, it's got 30, 40, 50-foot cliffs. It's about 100 feet high in places. The sides. It's like being in an Indian and the Gurkha troop. We forget the Indians. The Indians are there and fight bravely. It's that they recognise it as almost like the Indian frontier. You know, huge, a real gully. You can't get across it easily. There's a couple of places you can get across it, and this breaks up any attack. It means that the Turks can attack down it. But also, it just breaks up communications. Actually, the next one, Krithia Nulla, is also quite deep, but that's more like 30 feet maximum, and the cliffs are about so-called cliffs. They're referred to as cliffs. They are 10 foot. Actually, Baba Nulla is just steep-sided valley. The bugger is Kerev's Dare, which is a 100-foot drop places. I love the British. Whatever you Australians think about us British, we know we're worse than that. You can imagine the French. We give them the worst landing at Kumkali. Well, but they do well, but then we bring it back. Where do we give them? We give them the Karov's spur and facing the Karovsdale Valley, with that in front of their line of advance on Achi Baba. It's like a cliff in front of them. So they're forced to their left across the to Achi Baba way. And then there's this series of fortifications. They're being fired at from the other side of the strait, straight into their right flank, all the way along. Their base is V Beach, which is under direct fire. We whine about direct fire from Asia at W Beach. You do at Helles, at Anzac. But imagine the French. It's even closer. And you can see right in the back of it. The poor old French get the worst. And is this an accident, do you think? Who do the British hate most of all? Hate most of all? Do they hate A, the Turks, B, the Germans, or C, the French? And sometimes when you see what we do, it's C, the French.
Yes.
So the ground is split up, and this makes a unified advance difficult. It's not a nightmarish terrain like Anzac. Anzac is a very special terrain to fight a battlefield in. It's very small. Anzac's different. At Helles, at Helles you measure by. Eventually, we end up 3 or 4 miles in. It's only 3 or 4 miles across, but you end up 3 or 4 miles in. Anzac, the old Anzac, as they call it. I mean, it's not very far in, is it? It's I've forgotten what it is. It's no more than a kilometre. It's less, I think, and it's very small. You can walk round it in a few hours. So there we go. So it is very different. Anzac is very special in the sense that there are very few battlefields like Anzac. Helles is a difficult, enclosed, with the sea, I always call it the Adriatic, the Aegean on the left-hand side as they look up, and the straits on the other side. So there's no room for manoeuvre, and yet it's broken up by these 4 valleys. So what a place to fight. Awful.
Absolutely. So we should now mention and move on, Pete, to the importance of Krithia, the battles of Krithia.
There is no importance whatsoever to Krithia. And to do this, I'll do an old example. What is the objective of the campaign? Knock Turkey out of the war, which fundamentally means to threaten Istanbul, Constantinople led. But to do that, you've got to get into the Sea of Marmara. You've got to control the Sea of Marmara. Well, to do that, you've got to get through the straits. Okay? To do that, to get through the straits, you've got to take Kilid Bahir Plateau, which is the big, I call it the big bastard, because if you're at Helles, and actually if you're at Anzac, it's the big bugger. It's huge. It dominates the whole of Helles. If you look at any map, it's huge. Achi Baba is on the way to it, but to get Kilid Bahir, you have to first take the ground between Achi Baba and Kilid Bahir, and that's a nightmare. A tangle of ridges, flat. There's the Onion Valley, they called it, which is flat bottomed with a lovely nightmare of hills in front of you to defend. It's murder. To get that, you have to take Achi Baba. Achi Baba, remember, that's where your wrist joins onto your arm. That you could see everything from there. You can't see into Gully Ravine, and you can't see into Krithia Nulla. You can see everything else from up there. It's just laid out in front of you. Like you put your hand out in front of you, and it's like that. Wow. But to take Achi Baba, you first have to take Krithia. Oh, so does Krithia have any importance on its own? No. It's no disrespect. It's a poxy little village. Then it's called Alsatepe now. Then it was called Krithia. It is very small, unimportant, tactically insignificant village. It is just there. And the Turkish lines are just in front of it. You're like, so if you look at your hand, it's just behind your middle knuckle. If on your map of Gallipoli, there it is. Is that important? It's there. Would capturing it have any benefits? Not really. You need to take the Turkish 3 lines in front of it, and the lines behind it, and the lines behind that, and the positions up on Achi Baba. And the thing about Gallipoli is you end up with 3 battles of Krithia. The first battle of Krithia, which is an advance to contact, always a brutal business, Adam. You know that from any warfare, advance to contact. They could see you. You don't know where they are. They open fire. You suffer casualties. Second battle of Krithia, 6th, 7th, 8th of May. Another advance to contact. The Turks now have better defences, but we don't know where they are. And that's a terrible battle. And you lot focus on the destruction of one of the Australian brigades and the New Zealand brigade. But boy, the British get slaughtered as well, and the French. Third battle of Krithia is now 3 lines of trenches. It's a trench-to-trench battle. It's a formal Western Front-style battle. Terrible battle. The French get slaughtered again. The French, of course, by now are approaching the Kiev. They're just... The word buggered has many meanings, and in this case, I would apply it to what happened to the French. But there's terrible fighting in Third Krithia. We then start naming them by dates. So there's 28th of June where we attack along Gully Spur, and then there's the 12th, 13th of July, and then there's a diversion on the 6th, 7th, 8th of August. I often say, until the August offensive, most of the fighting is at Helles. This is where the big battles take place. This is where you have divisions smashing into each other. You may be able to hear that on the mind. Smashing into each other. Core battles, even. And if you read the official history, that's what it's about, big battles. You read Bean's history, and Anzac's about Lean's raid. Oh, battalion did this, or a battalion, or 10 men did this, or 10, and it's because the fight, no disrespect to it, and I'm a big admirer of Lean, actually. I know that but it's not big, is it? It's little tiny actions. All the Turks are attacking you.
Yep.
At Helles, it's 2 corps smashing into each other for the best part of 2 months. The French casualties, 12,000 dead, and that's an approximation because their cemetery has 12,000. It's confusing. The French have more dead than the Australians and New Zealanders combined. And
wow.
People forget it. The French have probably the most militarily effective force because they've got enough guns, unlike the British, and enough artillery, unlike the British. I mean, at Anzac, you have terrible problems with artillery. Not only do you not have much ammunition and guns, but you've got nowhere to put them. And I know there's a brilliant book by Chris Roberts, one of my very favourite Australian historians, coming out imminently about artillery at Anzac. You'll love it, Adam, and you should get him on your podcast. But you see what I mean about the fighting. And people call them the battles of Krithia. Well, they're not really. That's just the village in front of them. The Battle of Waterloo wasn't fought at Waterloo. It was fought on Mont St. Jean Ridge, or if you want, Belle Alliance Ridge, if you really want to be fair. That's what the Prussians call it, Battle of Belle Alliance. So do you see what I mean? So that's what the fight is like. That's what Helles is like. That's what it's major fighting.
No, it's from what you've just talked about, Pete. It's just absolute. I'm sitting here just gobsmacked. I can't believe that divisions were just annihilated at Krithia. It's just unbelievable. And so after when you said we move into the August offensives and we know that they failed, was there a plan? Or wasn't there a plan after the August after the big breakout was supposed to happen?
Well, that's the Suvla attack. I mean, the main, and this is just a corrective, a lot of people think Suvla was the main offensive and we let down the Australians. The main offensive was the Australian attack, the left hook. That was to capture the Surrey Bear Ridge. The Suvla thing was meant to help, but actually was to establish control of that area as a port, as a harbour, as a supply base, and most of all to take Teki Tepe and Kiric Tepe ridges. They failed utterly. They were faced by 3 Turkish battalions, and it's worth noting that that's more than faced anybody on the 25th of April. So that's an interesting little question for people. Anyway, once that's failed, what is there to do? Hamilton asked for 100,000 men. they're just about, on the Western Front, they're just lining up to fight the Battle of Loos. Now, we think the Battle of Loos is big. It's British perspective. The real battles are taking place up the French line, where they are smashing into them in the Champagne area, up on Vimy Ridge, which then was in the French sector. They're Artois. They're smashing 7 different kinds of shit out of each other. The casualties are unbelievable. And we have the Battle of Loos, which is sort of a couple of corps having a little bit of a go. It's a big battle to the British, and the casualties suffered are painful. Their losses are real, but within the scale of events, it's not that big. But it's enough to distract. There's no chance the British can send more 100,000 reinforcements to Gallipoli to do what? They'd asked for 100,000 before. They'd been given them. They'd failed. There's no prospect of success. If you look at the situation at Suvla, they're not going to get up on Teki Tepe, are they? No chance. They couldn't even get the foothills of the foothills. I mean, they take Green Hill. Look at, when you go to Suvla, hopefully with me and Matt, you'll see Green Hill, lovely hill. It dominates the ground around it, great. In front of it, Scimitar Hill. That's bigger. W Hills, that's much bigger. In front of that, there's Teki Tepe and a load of other hills. Anzac, they're not going to get out of Anzac. Even New Anzac, which is expanded and linked to Suvla, what's in front of them? The Saribare Range, all the way along, in front of them, everywhere they look down on. They're not going anywhere, ever there. Helles, well, Achibaba's still there. Behind Achibaba, there's the Kilid Bahia Plateau. You have no bloody chance. A renewed naval attempt? Yeah, they start looking at that. And it might have succeeded. But you know what? The Royal Navy's facing the Imperial German Navy across the North Sea. If we lose, we're buggered. We're desperate for destroyers, and here they are. They're planning. Some of the naval commanders are planning an assault with using destroyers as minesweepers. We need those destroyers. There are no real plans. Realists, and this is where Hamilton just refuses to accept it. The planning is hopeless. There's no plans possible. Hamilton's dismissed, because he won't even think of evacuation. And Sir Charles Munro comes in. And he is a breath of fresh air to me. He's a Western Front general. He's practical. He comes with other practical Western Front generals as well. And people like Maud, and I've forgotten his name just at the moment, the chap commanding 9th Corps, who'd taken over from Stopford, just gone out of my head just for the moment. And they look at it and they go, "You're having a laugh." Kitchener comes out. He goes, "You're having a laugh." He's still obsessed with the Muslim issue, but they recognise it's a hopeless position. And hence the evacuation. Now, a bit of advertising here for me and Matt. I've got a book about the evacuation of Gallipoli coming out, and I hope you'll all think of buying it. You'll see adverts for it on everything. Just have a look at it, because I'm very proud of it and very grateful to Matt for allowing me to do it. But so evacuation is inevitable. Or close down the Western Front, leave the French to it, and desert your allies and move the entire BEF to. How they're going to do that, I've no idea. But you recognise, you're shaking your head. We're seeing each other on Zoom. It's all bloody nonsense, isn't it?
Absolutely.
They have to evacuate. And the only thing is that it's great that thanks to an Australian brilliant Chief of Staff, Cyril Brudenell-White, Birdwood, and Munro for having the sense to see that the plans to sneak away, to thin out behind an outer screen, to use brilliant things like the silent periods to get the Turks, to condition the Turks into thinking, "Oh, it's gone quiet. Let's have a look. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, that's dangerous. They're still there." Quiet doesn't mean gone. So when it goes quiet, people in the front line are going, "Gone quiet over there. When has it gone?" We'll just stay here, I think.
Yeah, a bit
because
wiser.
Certainly from the work people like Harry Broad, somebody. But the analysis of the Turkish accounts has revealed that the senior command, didn't know that they were leaving. But the evacuation is our great success. We get the troops off. We lose very few casualties, and as far as I know, none dead. Not during the actual getting off the beaches. There's people triple casualties all the time, and so it's an utter failure. It's an utter failure. Even that's a screw up, because we evacuate the reverse. We evacuate Suvla and Anzac. and we leave them at Helles. What do you think? I'm going to ask you. What do you think that was, Adam? Yeah, I've seen your list of questions that you're going to ask me that. What do you think it was? What possible bloody reason? Can you think of one?
Oh, I don't. I haven't got anything, Pete. I actually don't. I honestly don't know why you wouldn't evacuate all at once. I don't quite. I mean, I know from a logistical point of view, that's the only thing that I can think of.
You're spot on. The only real answer is that the Navy thought they could only move 20,000 people at a time, and that means that the army made a decision at Gallipoli. Monroe and well, in fact, Birdwood made, and they decided to leave it. The Navy wanted them to keep it because they're barking mad. They thought it was useful in the anti-submarine war. They almost conceived it as a mini Gibraltar. Some people say, well, this is utter bollocks. I mean, it's absolutely no use for the submarine war. And even if it was, would the loss of life entailed in keeping it, with the big guns being moved, the more and more artillery being fed in from Bulgaria and the rest of it, through Bulgaria, not from Bulgaria, mainly from Austria-Hungary. Keeping it would have cost more lives than would ever have been lost by submarine attacks in the Mediterranean. So as soon as a new chief of Imperial General Staff came in, and this is Robertson, Willie Robertson, as they call him, he came in. He's an out-and-out Westerner, and at the same time, Haig took over from Sir John French. And these two people just went, same as practical soldiers. This is nonsense. Get them off now. And within a day or so, Robertson had got the government to agree to evacuate Helles. They actually go on the 8th and 9th of January. The Australians had left, the Australians and the British at Suvla had left on the 18th. No, was it 18th, 19th?
18th, 19th, 18th, 19th, and 20th. Yeah, 20th of December.
Must read that book sometime.
So, Pete, in your opinion, why do you think that the Gallipoli campaign failed? Why was it that we, like you said, it was a sideshow? The main enemy, and at the start of the podcast, you said the main enemy was the Germans on the Western Front. So why did the Gallipoli campaign not succeed?
It didn't succeed because the Turks are too good for us. Because it was a ludicrous strategic idea. Tactically, it was dangerous, and the Turks were well led, not just by Germans, by the way. That's the old British thing. Oh, well, it was Liman von Saunders and Canning guys. That's just because they wrote 2 books that were translated into English. The actual Turkish commanders were very, very good. And the Turkish infantry was brilliant in defence. As I mentioned, when they attacked, they got slaughtered because their attack tactics are just charge. And like everybody else, if you charge in the First World War with no sophistication, you get slaughtered. So they failed because the combination of the Turks, the terrain was difficult at Helles, impossible at Anzac, and difficult at Suvla. It was a secondary sideshow campaign. They didn't have the resources. But that is like one of these circular arguments. They didn't have the resources because they didn't have the resources, because it was a sideshow campaign. And because on the Western Front, they were desperately short of guns, men, blah, blah, blah. It goes round in a sodding circle. It was a ludicrous campaign from start to finish. The tragedy is 30,000 British dead, or 10,000 Australian, New Zealanders, 11, whatever it is, 12,000 French dead, and 60,000. That's the equivalent of Turkish deaths. People try and say they lost 250,000 dead. They're really good at bookkeeping, the Ottoman Empire, and they lost 60,000 as well. You've probably been to the sort of memorial cemetery at Abide, the Turkish memorial.
Yes, I have. Yep.
And you see, they've got accurate statistics, but we like to make it up.
Yeah, and it's just needless slaughter that shouldn't have happened, Pete. That's just what you take away from the whole Gallipoli campaign. But so just to wrap up, Pete, the Gallipoli campaign, it doesn't seem to have the same significance for the British as the Australians. Is that because for Britain it was a failure, or because more was focused on the losses that they suffered on the Western Front? Or do you think it's because Britain's history has centuries of wars. Do you feel that that's why it's not seen as significant as it is from an Australian point of view?
Well, firstly, in some ways, it is very much a remembered campaign in Britain. There are hundreds of books on it. And even today, there are still books coming out about it. There is a Gallipoli Association, which I know is international now, but there are lots and lots of members in Britain. It is a well-remembered campaign. It's not as well remembered as the Western Front, but the Western Front is a gigantic, titanic, amazing confrontation, which is unforgettable. Why do we not remember it like the Australians do? Because you're right, it's just another one. It's not because it's a failure. The British have plenty of failures, they remember. Just doing a thumbs up for the listeners at home. I mean, if we didn't, we have lots of failures, and we remember them. What it is for the Australians and the New Zealanders is it's their first real time. That people sometimes go over the top on this because it's a continuing process in the First World War. And while we see it in isolation to the troops involved, the Western Front becomes very important. And we all know, and there are great books about it, Pozieres, for instance, from Els. These are unforgettable things. But Pozieres, I think there were more casualties there, Australian casualties, than there were at Gallipoli. The casualties on the Western Front dwarf it. It's also, and this is the strange thing, Gallipoli is an utter failure. The Australians didn't perform great on the first day, not their fault really, but it was not, I mean, Anzac's not a success in the early days. Incredible heroism and grit and determination to hold it, all good. But again, no real success. When they attacked out in August, they didn't do very well, not their fault, I don't think. By then, they were riddled with disease as well, something we haven't mentioned. All sides were riddled with disease. All told, things like their staff work, their military competence, everything's not that great at Gallipoli. On the Western Front, they grow. And it's always perverse almost that because it's first, they remember Gallipoli. But actually, and I know Matt feels this, where the Australians come and New Zealanders, the Anzacs, come of age is on the Western Front, where they become a benchmark for quality. I don't think they're particularly better than the Canadians or better than the best of the British divisions, but they are a benchmark for quality. There's no one better than them. That's absolutely. And so I actually think that their achievements in 1918, particularly under Monash, are amazing. And a lot of people have started to recognise that. I know that Matt has been banging on about this and running tours and putting books out and podcasts out to try and make people realise that the First World War isn't just Gallipoli. Gallipoli is just the aperitif for the Australians. It's a taster, but it has a resonance because of this. It's the first time. People see it as generating the mateship, which is seen as a particularly Australian culture. That's bollocks. That's as much hubristic as the British, thinking that they're best at everything. This idea that the Australians have a unique access to mateship. Yeah, we all have mates, but it is a powerful emotion. And do you know what? I understand it. So the British have to respect the Australian view of Gallipoli, and I think we do. I try and be balanced in my judgments of what happens to them. I try and reflect on British failures, because there are a lot of British failures. Poor British generalship at times. And people forget most of the generals in charge of the Australians at Gallipoli were British.
No, yeah, absolutely. That's an overlooked. That's a key point, Pete. That you've just hit an absolute key point.
Sinclair, McLagan, Birdwood, they're British generals. Hamilton, of course, is. Looks like we can blame the Scots for a fair bit there.
Yes. No. No. Let's not be controversial, Pete. Let's not be controversial.
No, I apologise unreservedly to our Scottish listeners. All three of you.
No, Pete. I think you've answered that really well, and I think it's the whole campaign should just be remembered for what it is, and just hard fighting by brave men in a in a campaign that never should have happened. That's how we should remember it, I think.
It's a tragedy. That's what it is. It's
Absolutely.
a tragedy.
Absolutely.
The losses are real, very real, and very painful to all sides. But I think also, in one way, all sides did get credit. They deserve credit for the way they stuck it out. And again, I'm going to mention it, riddled with disease, under fire all the time, no gaps, nowhere to go, nowhere where you're safe. You might get off to Imbros for a couple of days if you were lucky once in the 6, 7, 8, 9 months. What a campaign. And that's why we remember it. And I remember it because it's interesting, and I had the pleasure of interviewing about 50 veterans who were there in my early days as an interviewer, and I will never forget it. And as I go there, their voices are almost in my head, and sometimes they are literally, because I've got tape recording type thing. I wish I could take things seriously for more than 2 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's all right, mate. No. So, Pete, just to finish up, so what are you working on now? What's Peter Hart got in the pipelines, and what's he working on?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on a book on the 2nd Fife and 4th Fire Yeomanry, who were in Sherman tanks in Northwest Europe. So they had a lovely time. Tommy Cookers, Ronsons, lit first time. And that's amazing. I did those interviews in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I looked at the date of birth. They're either over 100 or dead. And for Matt, I'm thinking of doing a book on 2nd or 3rd Krithia. I think 2nd Krithia at the moment. The future of Gallipoli lies not in stupid single volume books, pleased with mine, and there are some great ones out, but on books about small slivers of the campaign. 2nd Krithia, 3rd Krithia, the August Offensive. Even just a book about, say, the attack at Lone Pine. There's been several books on the attack at the Neck. I know that. But that's the kind of thing, small books. And that's what the future is. I yearn to see a proper book about the French at Gallipoli. I think you would like that as well.
Absolutely.
Because they are. We always joke about the forgotten army, but the French are forgotten because they show very little interest in it themselves. So they're partly to blame themselves.
Yep.
But there you go. So that's what I'm doing. I haven't quite decided which of those books I'm going to write. 2nd or 3rd Krithia. Keep it in order. 2nd Krithia, and that does have a large Anzac contribution that Matt might like.
Okay.
So there we go. That's what I'm doing at the moment.
No, it's great to hear what you're doing, and Pete, it's been fantastic to have you on and just get the British perspective of Gallipoli, because we in Australia always get the Anzacs perspective, but we don't look at the British perspective. So, as I say to my listeners, if you do get a chance, you must go and see Gallipoli. It's been terrific, and we'll definitely get you back on in the future. So, Peter Hart, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And if you want to hear more of me rambling on, Peter Hart's Military History Podcast.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast.